Great. Thank you, Jackie. And thank you, Jane and Carol and everybody for the updates. I have the job, we put together, our committee put together this set of speakers, and as people said, it's pretty timely. With this Republican administration that's working on many fronts to kind of shake the whole fabric of our society, we still need to continue to make things better in our corner of the world. And during this uncertainty, we really we need to continue to embrace the complexity of what's going on locally and see the possibilities for our future. These three speakers are here to help us look at some of the detailed impacts of gun violence, to walk alongside with the survivors, and to use our voices to move local, state, and federal policies just a little bit further. The first person who's going to speak is Linda Teplin from Northwestern University. And then we will have Craig Futterman after her. Linda will have to leave a little bit after that. And then we'll have our third speaker, Robert Emmons. So let me tell you a little bit more. Linda Teplin is the director of the Health Disparities and Public Policy Program in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Northwestern. She's the primary investigator for the Northwestern Project, which is a large-scale longitudinal study. And when I say that, it's 30 years worth of tracking and data looking at delinquent youth who were detained in the Cook County Juvenile Detention Center. And they have been following almost 2,000 people for almost 30 years. Linda, I will let you tell the rest of the story. And
okay. Okay. Great. And hopefully we will not get terminated. One never knows. So thank you so much for inviting me. It's my favorite audiences are people like you who are advocates and use our research to implement change. So thank you so much for inviting me. So I want to start off talking about mass shootings, because when we think about gun violence, most people think about mass shootings. And I always find that quite interesting because we are unable to prevent them. And yet they're terrifying because we can't prevent them. And they're terrifying because of their potential for contagion. But they're actually extremely uncommon. So I think you can probably see this reasonably well. This is the location, the little tiny red dots, which you can hardly see. And that's telling that in 2022, there were 642 mass shootings. And that's using CDC's definition of mass shootings, which is 4 or more killed in one incident. So they're pretty uncommon. So with all firearm deaths, mass shootings are only about 1.4% of deaths. And if you look at firearm homicides, we see just ordinary garden variety firearm homicides. We see that there were 20,390. So that even then, mass shootings are a very small proportion of that, only about 3%. And so what I always try to get out is that talking about gun violence we can't reduce gun violence much by preventing mass shootings. We have to look at your garden variety mass violence. So here's just a little chart I put together, and we see that of all the firearm involved deaths, only about 1.4% involved mass shootings. And firearm homicides, there were about 20,000 firearm homicides. So 97% of firearm homicides are from incidents other than mass shootings. Mass shootings account for only about 3%. And this is telling because so many people think of preventing gun violence in terms of preventing mass shootings. And the problem is that we can't do that. And that's because, and I love looking at these lists when people, and you see this in the newspaper all the time, what are the risk factors for gun violence? Things like extreme isolation or social withdrawal from real or perceived actions of others, easy access to firearms, that's pretty much any inner city kid, overt threats of violence, which could be even just spoken. So the problem is that we can't predict mass shootings because the risk factors are so common. If you look at these risk factors, you can probably think of 40 people that exhibit these risk factors, but in fact, there are so few mass shootings that you simply can't predict them. So what I advocate is that we need instead to look at the other 97% of firearm violence, which aren't mass shootings, but just your regular garden variety homicide, firearm violence. So we've developed, as has been mentioned, a longitudinal study of youth who were detained. We began that study about 30 years ago. It's still ongoing. It's still currently funded by DOJ and NIH. And we wanted to study. Are we okay?
The soft soap.
Pardon me? Can you hear me? Everything all right?
I think somebody unmuted themselves while you were talking, so no.
Oh, okay, no problem. No problem. I must tell you, I hate Zoom because I love talking to groups of people so you can really see them. I always find Zoom rather awkward. All right, so going back to what I was saying, it's impossible to predict mass shootings because the risk factors are so common and the outcomes, as I just showed you, are really so rare. So what I wanted to do was study violence in a particularly high-risk group of people. So I began the Northwestern Juvenile Project in the mid-90s, where we took a random sample of kids as they came into detention in Cook County. Now, why did we study Cook County? Not just because it's convenient, but rather because Cook County is typical. Chicago's a typical big city with typical big city problems. Whenever you do a study like ours, which is very expensive, and our study is funded only by the feds, you need to argue that you are choosing a place that is typical and therefore generalizable to, in this case, other large cities nationwide. We started this study, by the way, not just to study violence, but rather to look at health needs and health outcomes of youth who were detained. And the study was unusual because we have lots of studies of youth where the endpoint is becoming delinquent. But we have very few studies of youth who are already in the juvenile justice system. So the Northwestern Juvenile Project, I'm really pleased to say, is the only large-scale study of juvenile detainees looking at health needs and health outcomes as they age. Let me tell you a little bit about our method. Very simple, very straightforward. I love research that's simple, simple research questions. So we took a random sample of youth as they entered detention in Cook County. Now, what I'm showing you here is the slide showing our sampling characteristics. And what you'll notice is that we have a lot of females, we have not many white people, we have kids who were processed in juvenile court as well as automatic transfers to adult court. What I want to emphasize is that we oversampled certain groups to get these demographic characteristics of the sample. And that's because if we had chosen a purely random sample, we would have had only 15 and 16-year-old African-American males. That's all we would have had. And we would not have had enough girls to compare males to females. We wouldn't have had enough younger kids to compare young kids to older kids. We wouldn't have had enough kids processed in adult court. And we would not have had enough non-Hispanic whites. There are so few non-Hispanic whites processed in juvenile detention, also in jails and prisons, disproportionately few compared to their numbers in the general population, that in our study, we had to stay an extra 6 months just to get enough non-Hispanic whites for our sample. So it's important to, when you look at this, to realize this isn't what the detention center looks like. Rather, the detention center is disproportionately male, disproportionately Black and Hispanic, disproportionately 15 and 16-year-olds, and mostly kids processed in juvenile court. The method, again, very straightforward. Sampled them in the late 90s. We've re-interviewed them up to 13 times, soon to be 15 times because we just got funding from NIH to continue the study. The last interview that I'll be talking about today was 16 years after detention, although I think I have one slide that's 32 years later. We've had very good retention in the sample, and that's not only because we paid them, but for many of these people, they would say to the interviewers when we were processing their payment, they would say, "You don't have to pay me. It's enough that you listened to me." So these, think about what kind of kids go into detention. Guess how many of the youth in our sample came from Glencoe or Highland Park or Lake Forest? Just take a guess, shout out. Guess how many in our sample of nearly 2,000?
0.
Yeah, how did you know? 0, 0, 0. And that's because, well, maybe it's because kids at New Trier never get into fights, never use drugs, and never sell drugs. That's one hypothesis. But I think a more persuasive hypothesis is that when kids get into trouble at New Trier, they don't call the police, they call the parents, and the parents get their butt to school and say, "Well, please don't arrest poor Johnny. He just has a drug problem. We'll get him treatment. It'll be fine." And that's that for Johnny. But Jamal in an inner city school doing the same delinquent behaviors, engaging in the same delinquent behaviors, the police are already at the school. And so Jamal ends up arrested, detained, and then on a one-way road to the adult system as he ages. So I always like to emphasize that because at cocktail parties that we have at the medical school, many people say to me, "Oh, you study bad people." And I say, "No, I study poor people," because that's who ends up in juvenile detention and even in jail and prison. So these are our methods. What's critical here is that most large-scale longitudinal studies lose people if they're incarcerated when their interview is due. They just lose them, and they're never found. So what happens is that we have the least information on the people who are most likely to have bad outcomes. In our study, in contrast, I was passionate about retaining everyone so that we re-interviewed people no matter where they were when their interview was due. So they might have been back at home. They might have been, if they were underage, back in a juvenile facility. If they aged out, they might have been in jail. They might have been in prison. We went everywhere to interview our participants. So, and I mean everywhere, because we would interview people at a location of their choice. So we once interviewed an exotic dancer on her break. We've gone to court to get people when they show up in court for their date. We once interviewed a young woman who was in her boyfriend's garbage truck while he was at lunch, and we interviewed her there. So I always say we hit the streets for public health. So today I'm going to be talking about firearm violence, and in particular, I'm going to be talking about injury and death, and looking at the prevalence in our sample of firearm injury and death. So we kept tabs of the proportion of our sample who were injured or killed. So 5 years after detention, about 17% had been, 17% of the deaths were from firearm violence. I'm sorry, I misstated. 13% of our sample of 2000 had been injured by firearms. 4% had died from firearm violence. And obviously that only goes up with age. So 12 years after detention, about 19% of our sample had been injured by firearms, 7% had been killed by firearms. And 16 years after detention, when they were median age 32, it was 21% and 8%. And these numbers, by the way, are published in the medical journal JAMA Open. So if any of you want to look at that, and it's an open source journal, so you can actually get the whole article. Sex differences, well, not surprisingly, it's males who are disproportionately affected. So about 30% of males in our study had been injured or died from firearms, compared to only about 3% of the girls. Racial and ethnic differences in our sample, mirroring differences in the general population. It is Black males that suffer disproportionately from firearm violence. And let's remember, by the way, we sampled from detention, but we sampled them before they were not adjudicated delinquent. We sampled them when they entered detention. So everybody had just entered. They had not even gone before a judge yet. And so it's not a sample of youth who were adjudicated delinquent. They were just, we got them right after they showed up to detention. Comparing our rates to the general population, obviously our rates are much higher initially, and then they become more similar to the general population with age. So they are substantially different, what we call statistically significantly different, up to about age 29. And then after that, they're similar to that in the general population. And this is also from the article in JAMA Open. This is an interesting slide because this is looking only at Hispanic males by age. Most people don't study Hispanics. It's not that they don't study them, but they don't identify them as Hispanic. So many researchers, unfortunately, either lump them in with non-Hispanic whites, or else they lump them in a category called minority. So they have non-Hispanic white and minority could be anything. Whereas we were passionate about understanding these issues among Hispanic youth. And so we have this very interesting, although tragic slide looking at Hispanic males. And what we see is that the rates are much higher than the general population. And this is a rate, by the way, it's not a prevalence. So a rate tells you how many deaths per 100,000 person years. And you do it that way so that you can compare groups. So all told, we have the causes of death. This is 26 years later. And we see that firearms killed 56% of our males, of the males in our study. This is a very depressing chart. And just to put it in perspective, the death rate we had is higher than of US soldiers during the height of the Iraq War. So let's talk a little bit about implications of these findings. By the way, how much time do I have?
You're kind of right on time, but actually that was going to be my first question for you is, what are some of the policy implications?
I have 4 pages of notes on that. Well, one policy implication is that we shouldn't be worried so much about mass shootings because the risk factors are so common. We can't predict them, and they comprise a fraction of firearm deaths. So we are really wasting our time. So what we need to do is instead shift our concerns to the kind of violence that I've presented today. So a couple of recommendations is we need to think about prevention. So a couple of suggestions. One, we can train pediatricians to counsel parents on safe storage. Because if kids get guns, they'll do bad things with them. And they're not expensive. 25 bucks for a lockbox, $130 for a full-size gun safe. And there have been some limited programs to give coupons to parents in pediatricians' offices to so that they can obtain a lockbox. So those are programs that we can definitely expand. And we need to educate kids on gun violence inside the home and outside the home, because so many kids get their guns inside the home. And then outside the home, they may find them, they may steal them, they may borrow them, they may rent them from a gang, they may get them from an abandoned building, which is used as kind of a library for firearms by gangs. So we need to educate kids on safety before they become involved. Another recommendation is for medical centers to expand services, interventions for people who show up as victims of firearm violence, because we know that victims of firearm violence also become perpetrators. And so that's a perfect way to intervene with kids who are at great risk of being victimized and then perpetrating firearm violence. And then lastly, and this is a very broad recommendation, blighted neighborhoods breed gun violence. You have abandoned buildings, as I mentioned. So what we need to do is work on neighborhoods, because if we can make our neighborhoods safer, we can increase what are called blight remediation programs, which focus on neglected communities and eliminate sites that are used to store and sell illegal firearms. So these are critical things to do, and they're not cheap. But how do you measure that against human lives? This is a slide of all the deaths of people in my sample. Out of 2,000 people, we have lost 247 of them, and disproportionately to firearm violence. The ones in red are from firearm violence. And you can't read this slide because it's so tiny. When we first started doing this research, you could read it. But now that there are 247 deaths, you can't read it. So I am passionate about this and passionate about this issue. And I'm delighted to speak to advocates like you who can actually do something about it. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Linda. I think we have a couple minutes. Does anybody have a particular question for Linda Teplin? She's gonna have to leave us a little bit early, so I wanted to fit in any questions for her now, if anybody else has one.
This is Jane Conran. I do have a question. Hi, Linda.
Go ahead.
Linda, the Harris Center at the University of Chicago has done a lot of research on those neighborhoods.
Yep.
Does Northwestern or your team get a chance to collaborate with them at all on what they have learned and they are trying to do down in the neighborhoods in Chicago that they find are really, they've called them disorganized neighborhoods where there is just a high rate of trauma and violence that perpetrates trauma in the, young people growing up.
Are you talking about the Chicago Crime Lab?
I'm talking about, I think his name is Samuel Byrons. Is that his name?
Oh, because I work with the Chicago Crime Lab a bit. I go down there and lecture. And also at Northwestern, we have Andy Papachristos, who runs a neighborhood program. But I want to mention that when you do research, well, you have to choose if you're going to be an advocate or if you're going to develop interventions. You can't do both.
Okay.
For epidemiologic studies, I always joke, we describe the extent of the problem, And then I leave it to smarter people than me to develop the interventions.
Okay,
You can't do both. You can't you can't describe the problem and then intervene.
okay,
Only do one thing. So what we've done for years is describe the problem, and then I'm very active in dissemination, so that I meet with people in Congress, and just to make sure that our word gets out,
mm-hmm,
and then smarter people than me actually figure out how to fix it.
okay, okay, very good, thank you.
Great, thank you. Can we take anybody else have another question? Raise your hand or open up. Anyone else? Okay, I think what we're gonna do is move to our next speaker, just to kind of keep us going along. There's some, I think, Linda, I share your,
Yeah,
this
I'm
is,
trying to stop share.
oh,
it.
if you can stop it, great, thank you. Uh, Linda, I certainly, your data is what inspires me. It's the inspiration to keep working on this issue, because we need, all of these young people that we've lost so much in our communities, and we need to keep stop.
Exactly.
Selected Cook County to look at gun deaths in with young people. And they had a huge sample size.
Do you put your mute on, please? Thank you. Sorry about that. And so I'd like to move to, I think that's kind of telling that one of the things that that y'all don't talk too much about here is the interactions with police or policing. But that is certainly what ended up having all these young people, young poor people in detention. And so that's why our committee is community safety and police accountability. We're always looking at both sides of that picture. So we're glad to have with us tonight Craig Futterman, who is let me give him his technical stuff. He's the clinical professor of law at University of Chicago Law School, and he's resident dean in the college. He's founded and has been the director of the Civil Rights and Police Accountability Project of the Mandel Legal Aid Clinic for really a long time. Thank you very much. And he's worked with community members in Chicago to increase the accountability of the Chicago Police Department for a long time. He's one of the lead proponents and architects of the proposed remedies and the demands for police accountability here in town. So he's here to give us a bit of an update on how this process is going. Perhaps he can jump in on his what he's also seen in his research with young people in Chicago. So Craig, if you are ready, I will hand the microphone over to you.
Sure. Thanks so much, Anne. Thanks, really, everybody, for having me. I apologize, my voice is a little, excuse me, it's a little off tonight, but I'll do my best. One thing, this isn't what I planned on sharing, one thing that I just should mention, just because so much, since focus I'll be talking about will be police accountability in Chicago, but just because this is an interesting crossover with what Dr. Teplin's doing and studying, my clinic's engaged right now in a partnership with the Trauma Center at the University of Chicago, and one of the things that we're looking at that relates to police accountability have been the ways in which police have violated the fundamental civil and human rights of gunshot victims in trauma centers, and have interfered with the ability of doctors, nurses, social workers to treat and sometimes save patients. And as Dr. Teplin was saying, I mean, so there's, in terms of population, a lot of my client population in the clinic is really coextensive with the patients in the trauma center and their families in many ways. And I just wanted to note that while I'm not talking about gun violence today, I'm glad at other times, and also folks want to talk about that project, I'm glad to share more about that too. This is beyond a painful time for us where we're fighting for our lives, constant assaults on what we hold dear, terrifying period for all of us. Strategy of just shock and awe, designed to distract us. I mean, with every day, multiple new announced horrors, designed to keep our heads spinning, designed to keep us off balance, and as Anne Wright highlighted, designed to cause us to lose focus on fundamental human rights issues at home here in Chicago. And so I don't want to just be mischaracterized like it's Chicken Little, but we have some 5-alarm fires going on right here, right now in Chicago when it comes to police accountability. And with all that's going on, we are at grave risk of returning to a state of police impunity in Chicago, and the very same impunity that has allowed the most abusive officers in Chicago to prey on the most vulnerable among us, and with absolute knowledge that nothing will happen to them. So, dang, I didn't realize my voice would be this bad at the end of the day. I've just been going. I wanted to start with COPA, with the the agency that investigates police misconduct in Chicago, because I want to start with there, because first, what COPA's achieved has been nothing short of historic here. It's the very first time in the history in Chicago that the agency responsible for investigating police abuse has actually sought to hold police officers accountable when they abuse their powers and hurt people. It's the first time that that agency has actually strived to conduct independent, unbiased, and higher quality investigations, and to make their work available to the public so we could all see it. And it's the first time that such an agency in Chicago has endeavored to provide timely and accurate information to the public, to all of us, when police officers kill community members. And while their investigations have been far from perfect, and we can see them too, they're demonstrably superior to anything we've seen in Chicago history. And I want to lift some of these things up because I think these are things that aren't known or not widely known, and at a time now that it's under assault. In each of the last 3 years, COPA has actually recommended more meaningful discipline when police officers abuse their powers than the predecessor agencies had proposed in the previous 4 years combined. I mean, more in each of the last, more discipline, more recommended discipline, more seeking to fire officers who abuse their powers in each of the last 3 years than in a combination of the 4 previous years combined. With increased transparency and accountability, and this relates to gun violence too, but violence by police, the number of people shot and killed in Chicago by Chicago police has decreased 16-fold, and complaints of Chicago police abuse decreased by more than 25%. I mean, in contrast to the more than weekly instances in which Chicago police shot community members in the years before the creation of COPA, Chicago police killed 5 people, still too many, in 2023, and 2 people in 2022. Way too many, but light years away from where we were just less than a decade ago. So I'm not here, sadly. I wish I'd be here just to share the good news, but there is a 5-alarm fire. It's absolutely no surprise, but COPA is under assault, and an assault that's led by the Fraternal Order of Police, and completely predictable. I mean, what happens when the very first time in Chicago history, if a police officer abuses their powers, they could actually be held accountable? That it's not surprising that the FOP is doing everything in its power to dismantle COPA and to make it the ineffective agency that the agencies have been throughout Chicago history. Not just ineffective, actually there'd be a misnomer, to make it an entirely effective agency where the purpose of the agency is to be every bit a part of the city's machinery of denial, to say, oh, we have an agency that looks into, investigates this, nothing to see here. And where complaints might go in dirty, but they come out, and this is among the things that studied, but there was like a less than 1 in 1,000 chance when an officer would abuse a Black person in public housing that they'd be subjected to any meaningful discipline. So FOP, and then more though disturbingly, police superintendent then jumped on this as well, and with false narrative saying, oh, COPA, it's biased against the police. Police accountability, actually holding police officers accountable, is making police commit suicides. That's literally what the superintendent said just a couple short months ago. And that police accountability essentially, and this is just the antithesis of what research shows, by actually seeking to hold police officers accountable in Chicago, the superintendent and the FOP is saying that it's making all of us less safe, the opposite of truth. And you mentioned at the outset of this meeting, and this is one of the things that is, deeply disappointing, and but something that needs to be addressed. Many people here fought for the creation of an agency that would, an ordinance that created an agency to provide some form of community oversight over the police. Sadly, though, this agency is called the CCPSA, Community Commission for Public Safety and Accountability. I think most of the folks here know it well. You talked about attending the district council meetings, critically important. That the CCPSA moved to remove the leader of COPA, a person who had done a remarkable job, actually, and a first in history job in trying to take an agency whose culture it was to bury police misconduct underground to an accountable, publicly accountable agency that did credible investigations of police misconduct without bias in any direction, and actually sought to hold officers accountable. So as I talk to you right now, the agency, and it's similar to like Trump, it takes a long time to build something and to try to do something right, but breaking things can happen quickly and easily. And COPA's broken, and it's being broken right now. And the CCPSA, under the ordinance, as I think Ann or someone else referenced, has the power to appoint, to nominate who will be subject to mayoral approval, and ultimately city council approval, but to nominate who's going to lead COPA next. And there's been a tremendous amount of damage done. And if people don't show up at the CCPSA meetings, if people don't let the commission, city council, and the mayor know that we are watching, that we aren't going to let the city revert and turn the clock back to the days of old where police officers knew that they can abuse the most vulnerable among us and know that nothing's going to happen. And we can't afford at this point to take our eyes off that ball. And at this moment, and it's going to be difficult even for credible people or someone who is so oriented to actually work to hold, who believes in police accountability. Why would you even think about taking this job if this is what happens when you actually do this work? So number one, COPA, because so much of this group is done to move and fight for police accountability. One necessary ingredient for there to be any of that, if the agency that's investigating the police remains biased to protect the police and has in the past, there's no path toward accountability, and there's no path toward ending the pattern of practice of civil rights violations in Chicago. Secondly, because I'm focusing first on the bad news because, and as a police accountability project, that's what's most in jeopardy right now in Chicago. This is something that Chicago Women Take Action have been on the front lines together, working with us and with other community members. And that's also with respect to accountability. So it's like COPA can recommend serious discipline, and then when FOP was seeing, ooh, that actually might happen, that officers might actually be held accountable, could actually lose jobs, lose pay, and that would actually change behavior and address some of the racist and sexist abuse that had become all too common over the decades, the wrongful convictions, etc. That the next move, and taken at the same time that the FOP has had a full-out assault on COPA, is then to seek to drive back behind closed doors. And I see so many of the people, I see Betty as well, who've been on the front lines fighting against this. The FOP is seeking right now to push back behind closed doors hearings that relate to the most serious forms of misconduct, so that no one can see. And so again, and to put it back before a small group of arbitrators who have a long track record of protecting police officers in Chicago from accountability. We are in litigation right now over that, and filed an amicus brief with you and with CWTA, and awaiting argument before the Court of Appeals. And at the same time, I just want to flag this because, again, so in each of these stools, if there's not an agency that's going to credibly investigate police misconduct, there'll never even be a hearing. So you got to address COPA first and foremost. But then secondly, if we allow the FOP then to, even if you have a credible agency that do real investigations of police misconduct, that with just a blink of an eye behind closed doors, arbitrators who have been hand selected by the FOP can undo it. No public hearings. Again, we're back to a state of impunity. So we also should be thinking at the same time, and we've worked also with CWTA on potential state legislation that can also address this in addition to what we do in courts. Couple just, and maybe I'll just mention a couple of other things and then stop for the sake of time. I want to mention at least maybe just two or three other issues that we've been working on. But if I were just pressing most, it's addressing those two fundamental issues of police accountability in Chicago, because if we don't address that, everything else falls. One on the more good news, but there's also some legislation that I want to just alert everybody to. It has to do with home raids. So Chicago police also, as many in this room know, have engaged in also a many years long practice of targeting homes in Black and brown communities, raiding family homes, busting down folks' doors, often people and families who have nothing at the wrong homes and for no good reason at all. And then also often, and it's related to like what Dr. Teplin said about who from anyone from Lake Forest or whatnot, there's still same amount of drugs. Most of the raids in Chicago and the data show have been related to vast majority drug crime and small amounts, and often small, going after fairly small amounts. And these raids with officers coming in with assault rifles, often pointing them as little kids, abusing families, people know very well. And this legislation I'm going to talk about is rightly named, and she's advocating for Anjanette Young, social worker whose home was also a few years back wrongly raided, when she was undressed and just treated her as less than a person, even after knowing that they were in the wrong home. So one of the things that we have accomplished and fought for then within the consent decree, or one of the consent decrees in federal court over the Chicago Police Department is we challenged that practice and challenged the policies that led to that. And we've already been able to make some incredibly dramatic changes. From one, the police were raiding about 15 to 1,600 homes of Black and brown families every year. We've got it down to about 200 homes. That's thousands of people and families and kids who helped to save some serious trauma and long-lasting trauma. While we haven't been able to win an absolute prohibition on dangerous no-knock raids, we dramatically limited no-knocks to only when someone's safety is at risk. We put harm mitigation at the center of the police department's raid policies. Any raid requiring to minimize trauma, intrusion, and damage at the center, and to be accountable for failing to do so. And again, without COPA, there won't be that accountability. To actually prohibit raids when the risk of harm outweigh its potential benefits, to ban nighttime raids except in documented emergencies, to eliminate and to put forward eliminate the use of informants who officers have known have provided wrong and false and inaccurate information in the past, to protect kids and other vulnerable people, to avoid raids when people most vulnerable are expected to be home. And we also want a lot of restrictions that protect children inside the homes, prohibit questioning, interrogation in all but emergency circumstances, banning handcuffing of kids and parents in front of their kids unless there's an immediate threat of physical harm. All kinds of training and public reports, and there'll be a lot more data now in these raids going forward. Body cams, everyone has to wear them, and more. But 4 things that we didn't win, and these are 4 things that are still critically important, and that that we need to press through legislation and statewide legislation. And there is a bill that I just want to let people know about. One we didn't win. One of CPD's huge practices in these raids are just willy-nilly pointing guns at people, old, young, and without cause. And so there should be a basic rule. You don't point, this is a basic gun safety rule. You don't point a gun at a person unless you're prepared to kill them. And meaning that the only time that officers should be allowed to point guns at people, much less people in their homes, kids, is when those folks pose an immediate threat of death or serious injury to another person, including officers. CPDs refuse to implement that, and we and children continue to be traumatized as a result. There needs to be an absolute ban on no-knock raids. I can talk about that more and talk about data, but I won't in this for the sake of time. And to before, just like Anjanette Young, before police officers come in and bust down doors, that they wait a minimum, at least a minimum amount of time to give people a reasonable opportunity to answer the doors. And finally, to ban raids for low-level offenses, like low-level drug offenses, where the harm caused by these raids far outweigh any potential benefits. So there's a bill in Springfield right now. It's a House bill just introduced by Cam Buckner and Kelly Cassidy, called the Anjanette Young bill. It just got out of the Judiciary Committee. There are going to be negotiations about the bill this week, and that's something that needs to be on, in my view, everyone's radar. I could mention I'll just mention these 2 things and stop, and I won't talk about them now, but I'm glad to answer questions. And this relates to gun violence. There's a horrible pilot project focused again in a Black neighborhood in Inglewood, in the district in Inglewood, that the state's attorney has abdicated the responsibility of overseeing felony gun charges and just allowing Chicago police to charge with felony gun charges without any oversight whomever they want. We've seen stuff like this before. It is a recipe for mass incarceration. It's a recipe for also not just mass incarceration, but the charging false arrest and prosecutions of Black and brown people in particular. I'll stop there. I mean, because the list of police accountability can go on forever, and there's a lot that's going on both in the federal consent decree that we're intimately involved in, and I guess I should just mention at least another consent decree that people may know less about. That's about the Chicago Police Department's long practice of holding people incommunicado, denying access to people who are arrested incommunicado without access to the outside world, without access to a phone call that we fought for, and access to a lawyer who's available through the public defender's office 24/7. And despite this consent decree, it's still the case in Chicago that less than 1% of the people in Chicago police custody have been able to access a lawyer. And even those who face decades in prison and who are most vulnerable to police interrogation continue to be denied access to counsel. And we are initiating enforcement proceedings at this moment. And even under, again, this administration, there is still strong and hard pushback against just the most basic premise in the world that you arrest someone, you have a right to a phone call, to phone calls, to talk to the outside world. You have a right to talk with a lawyer, to get legal help, to try to prevent the kinds of abuse that have long occurred in these interrogations. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Craig. Again, more fuel for fire in the belly. It's there's a lot of maddening things going on in this area. A quick question from the chat. What's the name of the bill that just got out of judiciary? Do you have the number on top of your head, or?
Yep, it's the Anjanette Young bill. It's called the Anjanette Young bill, and it's House Bill 1611.
1611. Thanks. Jackie Grimshaw had a quick question about, so why did the CCPSA want to remove the COPA leader? What do you know, or?
I prefer not to speculate. There's a lot, and you can follow a lot of the madness that's in the press. But there have been some real concerns about capture of parts of the CCPSA by the FOP and by police interests. So, I mean, the notion, or at least a lot of the vision behind the creation of CCPSA would be, real community people who've been most impacted by police abuse having real power and oversight over the police department. And, there've been a significant amount of challenges and early challenges as to the effectiveness of the agency, and will it ultimately work? Will it do and accomplish what we all here tried to create it to accomplish, and can it do harm? So there are a lot of, and I don't want to pretend to know, but there are a lot of also, not just allegations, but I mean, there are some very close relationships between the heads of CCPSA and the head of the superintendent of police, and in ways that may be undermining the independence that we hope to see. But there are 2 and 3 sides to every story, meaning that, there's, so within COPA, and it's not surprising that what I'll call like the old guard, there's a long history that predated COPA, again, protecting police and trying to change the culture and trying to bring about a culture of accountability. Also upset, just as Kim Fox upset a lot of folks in the state's attorney's office, not surprisingly upset and pissed off people within COPA who were committed to the old ways. And there are lawsuits that are pending, and a lot of mud that has been tossed. I'll stop there.
Great, thanks. All right. Hey, Ramsey, you have a quick question?
Yeah, just first and also Craig, we just want to thank you for your decades of leadership on this. We are where we are in without a small amount of your leadership and work, and just greatly appreciate that and your kind of analysis today. You've mentioned a couple of things that we can see to do, and one is following what's going on with COPA. Secondly, with the Anjanette Young bill, are there one or two other high priority actions or that you would ask us to again to prioritize in working it together with you?
My list can like go on and on and on, and I think sometimes less is more. And I just, I don't want to spread ourselves too thin. And when I say, police accountability and the possibility of police accountability in Chicago, something that all of us have worked so hard for, is in peril. That to me it's job one. It's, related to it, and this goes to the Chicago Police Consent Decree as well, the federal consent decree. It's really fighting to ensure that, this has been one of the most frustrating processes of something also that people here and throughout the city so long fought for the opportunity, this lever, the potential power, potential change. And it's moved at a glacial pace, and too much of it, and this is just the theme, and this relates to the COPA stuff too. It's the theme of keeping people who've been most impacted on the outside looking in and outside of the room where it happens. And so I'd say parts of the other action item, this relates to the Chicago Police Consent Decree, it's fighting to ensure that it's not just we collectively have voice, but an institutionalized and voice of power that, the deals and the negotiations shouldn't be behind the closed doors. And then you find out, is racial profiling and traffic stops going to be part of the consent decree, or is there going to be a real community-based conversation? And also, what will it look like? What will, even if it becomes part of the consent decree, are the things that many folks in this room have been fighting for? And I would add this, of course, to the list, but to end and outlaw pretext stops, to outlaw low-level stops, outlaw consent searches. But the negotiations about what's actually happening have been behind closed doors. And so then we shouldn't be in a position where then we see here are a new set of rules that have been negotiated without community folks and most impacted folks and orgs at the table. So I got that. That's the other theme I would just lift up.
Thank you.
Great.
Yep.
Great, thank you very much. All right, we're gonna move right on to our third speaker. I feel like, we've had the view of, we have too many people being shot, too many people being killed, too many people being arrested inappropriately, rights violated. In Chicago this year, we have a little bit of better news. And I only say a little better. To date, there have been 91 gun homicides in Chicago, and that is the lowest number in 10 years. But that doesn't really make me happy. And I think, again, gives us plenty of action to take. We're talking about what Chicago's doing. A lot of what happens with gun control and how guns are available in Chicago is based in our state laws and regulations. And so the next person we have to talk tonight is Robert Emmons. He is here as the organizing consultant for One Aim Illinois, a statewide coalition of which we are a member. They educate and advocate and organize to end gun violence in Illinois. There have been a lot of things going on this year in the state legislature, still some more work to do. So Robert, if you are ready, I would like to also then let you take control here.
Thanks so much, Anne, and it's so good to be here with all of you. My apologies, I got my timing off a little bit, so I still have the baby running around, so I'll be rather quick to talk a little bit about what One AIM is up to. So like Anne said, One AIM is the state's largest coalition of gun violence prevention and community violence intervention organizations. We represent about 225 different organizations around the state of Illinois. We're right now advocating for a few different policies, two that we're kind of just tangentially helping out some other organizations that are leading the charge, which is the Homicide Families Rights Act and the Homicide Data Transparency Act. I'll talk a little bit more about those. The bill that we are owning the most responsibility for in terms of organizing our coalition around is Senate Bill 8, House Bill 3688, which is the Safe at Home bill. And I'll make sure, Ann, you have a copy of our fact sheet to send around, as well as some direct actions that we have. That bill is, in terms of the chief sponsors, are Senator Laura Ellman and Senator Ron Villivalam in the Senate. In terms of the House, we have Representative Mara Hirschauer and Representative Kevin Olakal. So those are our chief sponsors. Right now, we're asking for representatives and senators in both chambers of the Illinois General Assembly to become co-sponsors of this bill. It, again, is the Safe at Home bill. So the problem, it's no secret here. There are way too many tragedies that have resulted when guns get into the hands of children, at-risk people, and criminals. And there are numerous studies that show that unsecured firearms and lost and stolen guns are fueling incidents of suicide, unintentional shootings, mass shootings, and crime in our communities. There's an old African greeting that instead of saying hello, they ask, how are the children? In short, in America, the children aren't doing well. 54% of gun owners don't lock all of their guns securely. Every year, 350 children under the age of 18 unintentionally shoot themselves and or others. In 3/4 of school shootings, the shooter acquired the firearm from their parents or other relatives. An estimated 82% of adolescent firearms suicides involved a gun belonging to a family member. Every year, over 380,000 firearms are stolen from their lawful owners, often diverted into illegal markets, fueling gun crimes and violence. And lastly, guns reported lost were 3 times more likely to be used in crimes, while stolen guns were 9 times more likely to be used in crimes. This is a uniquely American problem. And as my pastor always says, if guns made us safer, America would be the safest country in the world. But instead, it's the exact opposite. But thankfully, we have bills like the Safe at Home campaign because there are solutions. We can better promote responsible gun ownership in Illinois by enhancing what it means to safely store weapons and strengthen reporting requirements for lost and stolen guns. Safe and secure storage practices help prevent guns from being stolen, diverted into illegal markets, and used in gun crime. The Safe at Home bill will prevent children, at-risk individuals, and criminals from accessing deadly firearms and inflicting crime and violence in our communities. So here are some of the solutions within the bill itself. It outlines improved safe storage requirements in homes where a minor at-risk person or someone prohibited from using a firearm could gain access to them. It changes the definition, and this is a really important one. Well, all of them are important, but this one, in terms of just the children, changes the definition of a minor to a person under age 18 of age. Adds civil penalties associated with the failure to safely secure firearms at first violation. Courts may impose community service or restitution. We have to secure these firearms, and those that have firearms should be held responsible for them. It strengthens the requirement for reporting a lost or stolen firearm from 72 hours to 48 hours after the owner first discovers the loss or theft. It requires education for gun owners of the obligation to report a lost and stolen firearm at the time of firearm purchase. And it requires ISP, which is Illinois State Police, to create a portal for law enforcement to report individuals who have failed to report lost or theft of a firearm. So like I said, thankfully, there are solutions to some of our country's most pressing issues, which is gun violence. And the Safe at Home bill will help to reduce gun violence and undoubtedly help to save lives. Like I said before, here's a direct action I'm going to throw into the chat. We would love for you to contact your legislators. This bill, thank goodness, has passed through Judiciary Committee and it's in the hands of the Senate Executive Committee. This coalition, One Aim Coalition, helped to outslip our opponents on more than one occasion as it relates to this bill and some other bills. But it's going to require us to continue to push and continue to advocate for a bill, like I just said, that will undoubtedly save lives. So please, please, please complete that direct action. One Aim Illinois is also heading down to Springfield on May 20th. 2025. If you're available, we'd love for you to come down. We're going to have buses leaving from around the city and downstate, headed down to Springfield to advocate for this bill, as well as two other bills. And I'll briefly talk about the two other bills, because I know we're pressing up on time. And the other two bills that One Aim is helping to push is the Homicides Victims Families Rights Act. And that would allow families to request a re-review of 3-year-old cases, putting new eyes on bills that have gone cold. And the other one is the Homicide Data Transparency Act, which will require law enforcement to publish how many homicides resulted in an arrest or charge. This is, of course, in an effort to solve crimes and to reduce the clearance rate here in Illinois, which is leading to, unfortunately, more gun violence. Gun violence is undoubtedly an epidemic in Illinois. It can be tracked in the same way a disease can be tracked. So it has to be addressed with the same level of reinvigoration that an epidemic like the COVID-19 pandemic had in terms of solving gun violence. So these bills, again, are seeking to improve the clearance rates here in Illinois, and also just make our households and overall our communities that much more safe to reduce gun violence. And I'll end there, Ann.
Great. Thank you, Robert. I appreciate you going through all that list, and not making me have to make sure I get it all. You always have it going on. Everybody, don't worry. You do not have to memorize all that from this. We do have, we will have a follow-up email with a lot of this data. Dee's been working hard on that, and we'll have that together. We do have some time for questions. If anybody has any questions specifically for Robert, or if Craig is still here, raise your hand or drop it in the chat. Dee, you want to go ahead? Unmute yourself, Dee. You're still muted. No. There you go.
No, sorry. My first question is, the mayor did appoint a temporary head of COPA, and I wondered if Craig has any feelings about her. And second, I wonder what you think about the group that's overseeing the consent decree, Maggie Hickey and her group, because allegedly only 6% of the consent decree, although we spent millions of dollars on it, are filled. I know there are secondary and tertiary things that allegedly are in the works, like policies and some training, but I'm just curious about the appointment to COPA and what the oversight group is doing with the consent decree.
Thanks, Dee. The mayor's appointment of the acting head of COPA is really, I guess, designed to just try to keep things going. She's someone who's been both at COPA for a long time She was at IPRA before COPA, and I think she even was at, may have been at in the Office of Professional Standards in the police department even before that. While she's been there a long time, I don't know her super well, and I don't have a strong opinion. And I think my opinion is more of just, at least what I know is fairly neutral. I don't. The good news is I haven't heard things that would characterize her as a core part of the problem. But I also, you know, she hasn't been someone who's been looked to as to be the solution. And the reality also with when Andrea Kirsten, the head of COPA, resigned, all of top leadership basically resigned and is leaving or is in the process of leaving with her. So from the inside, there wasn't a lot to choose from. And so I don't have a strong opinion. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that she is temporarily holding the reins. As far as the consent decree and the monitoring team, you're right that, and when I said we've moved at a glacial pace, that they're up to maybe, what is it, 8% or something like that right now compliance, but after far more than 5 years, it's beyond unacceptable. And you know, I have to be a little bit delicate with what I say here, but you know, where I've seen across the United States consent decrees be the most successful, one of the ingredients when it comes to who the monitor is the monitor themselves and the monitoring team, not just competent, but going to aggressively monitor and hold the feet of the agency who's been found to have violated, engaged in massive civil rights violations to the fire, and push. And what we've seen, so there are lots of what are essential ingredients of a consent decree. That's one of the important things. And this monitor has taken more of a, what I'd call a cooperative approach to provide support and working alongside and more is operating in the vein of more gentle pushing. And this isn't controversial, but you know, it's no surprise. I mean, Chicago police have shown, and this isn't just like an indictment of everybody, but the agency has shown that, and you know, among the things that I've learned in doing this work as long as I have is that they're not going to change unless people make them change. And so one of the things that, yes, we all should be demanding more from the monitor in terms of more, not just simply reporting, and also even the reporting has been fairly kind. I mean, so you would think with that low level of compliance that you would be reading really scathing language in reports, but we should be seeking more aggressive enforcement and monitoring than what we're getting. People have different styles, but I think now, seeing where we are right now, that's one of the ingredients that, you know, really need to be stepped up. And yes, a ton of money has been spent on not just the decree, but has gone to the firm that's monitoring the decree.
Thank you, Craig. Okay. I think we have time for another question or two. Anybody? Give you a minute.
Anne and Craig and Robert, I have a question. You know, I've been working on getting funded for the transit authorities up here in Northeastern Illinois. And on my last visit to Springfield, the chairman of the House Transportation Committee was adamant that we needed a transit police force. So what are your thoughts on having another police force here in Northeastern Illinois? Now, I want to hear from both of you.
Robert, go ahead. You got first.
That's a great question. I was over here really thinking about it. My initial thoughts were, do we really need another police force? Um, hmm.
I tell you what, I'll jump in while both of
Go ahead, Ann. This is a good question. I haven't thought about it.
in the late 1980s, early 1990s, when I worked at the Chicago Housing Authority, we decided residents were saying the Chicago Police Department is not treating us right. They're not giving us the police protection that we need. We need a better police department. So in research and development, we decided we were going to have our own police department for CHA, and we were going to hire CHA residents, and we were going to have community-based policing. We were going to figure out how community members could be the police officers. That was a pretty quick failure, and that police department eventually was absorbed into the Chicago Police Department because it was basically the same thing, just smaller, with a different jurisdiction, and did not do the job for us. So I tend to say, if what we've got in policing, if this model that we have is not already working and has problems, why would we want more of it? Let's have a different way to secure and make us all feel safe on the train. We don't necessarily need somebody with police powers and another gun on the train. That's my thought.
Thank you. All right, have you fellas thought enough about it?
I totally agree with Ann. And I think there's two bills that I referenced: the Homicides, Families, Victims' Rights Act, and the Homicide Data Transparency Act, that seeks to improve the way current policing is being handled here in Illinois. So I think I've subscribed to what Ann's saying. We have a lot of work to do with the current police force. So before adding to the police force, we need to strengthen that and focus more on just community policing versus an actual new form of policing that all statistics points to doesn't actually help to solve crime, doesn't stop bullets. The funding could be used for many other things designed to actually doing that.
Thank you, Robert. All right, Craig, you're not off the hook.
All right. Well, you're gonna get lots of agreement because I agree. I don't want to pretend to have studied this particular this as in police department for Northeastern Illinois public transit, but I share both Ann and Robert's opinion, and and it starts also with just, I'd go back to even the work that Dr. Teplin was doing and describing earlier on in terms of we have X amount of dollars for public safety, and there's so much that has been proven to be effective toward addressing, preventing violence, and the constant push for more police and more police officers, more arrests, more jail, more incarceration being the answer has proven just the opposite of the answer. And similar to what Mr. Emmons' pastor says about, we'd be the safest country. If it were all about guns, same thing. If it were all about how many people we're locking up, how many police officers that we're putting on the ground. If that were the answer, US would be a far safer nation, and it's shown that, and other countries have also shown us that that's not the answer. And I can say that without also minimizing that there are real safety issues on public transportation today, and we need to do some things differently and better. And I don't want to pretend to have all the answers or solutions and ways in which we can look out for one another, but more and more armed police officers to address this in separate and individual departments. And I also lived through the CHA police, which, there was moment of of possibility, but turned into an utterly failed experiment. And actually, public housing, particularly in Chicago, is where we've seen some of the most abusive policing and most corrupt crews of officers in all of Chicago history.
Yep. Thank you both. Betty,
Thank you.
to give us your questions, please.
Hi, I was just thinking, and I'm probably older than most people on the call, but I remember when the Park District had their own police and people were being chased by Chicago police, for example, and all they had to do was cross the street and go into Washington Park or one of the parks, and the Chicago police had no jurisdiction over it. I could see the same thing happening with transit police. You know, if they committed a crime on the train and once they ran down the steps and were no longer on the train, then the transit police wouldn't have any control or jurisdiction over them. So it just doesn't make sense, in my opinion, to split it up. The only thing that used to be separate that isn't anymore was when CTA had their own people cleaning snow and cleaning their streets. And the buses always had a clean route when CTA was responsible for their streets, but that went away once, you know, it went to the city. So I don't think separation, you know, is an issue at all or should be.
Great, thank you. All right, well, I think we are getting close to our time. So I do want to say, just to kind of end with, while I've been angered at the data, I said I'm angered at the data and the situations that we've got going on. I'm truly heartened by such great hardworking people that we have who can come and tell us what they've been doing and working on for decades. And all of us, the work we're doing, it's always a good support. One of the things I was hearing earlier is that if we all keep shoving on these issues from all the sides, we can keep working and hopefully find that improved world that we all envision. Let's just keep on supporting each other and providing strength and solidarity. It just really is that this is the only way we can keep on going, is to work together. I do want to mention some technical things. We are going to send a follow-up email with actions. It's going to have all the bill details that Robert was talking about, COPA actions, CCPSA actions, whole bunches of stuff. It's not a short one, but it's going to be really juicy. So read the whole thing. You can keep watch on our emails. We'll send you stuff. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Chicago Women Take Action, same thing everywhere, no other special names. And we are always posting what's going on. The next Community Safety and Police Accountability Committee meeting is in the morning on Monday, April 28th at 8:30 a.m. But you don't have to come out in your jammies. We'll be on Zoom. We are having a small pottery fundraiser for Chicago Women Take Action on Saturday, April 26th from 5 to 9 at the Pottery Studio, where they're selling, it's my pottery, a bunch of stuff. There's details about that to come. Our next monthly meeting for Chicago Women Take Action, Jackie mentioned earlier, is on Monday, May 5th, starting again at 5:45 with speakers at 6, hopefully about communication, or we'll communicate about something else. And then Carol mentioned on Thursday, June 5th at 6 p.m. That's the Strides for Peace fundraiser. We are fundraising through that, but there are also many, many other violence prevention organizations who are funded through that race. And it's I hear it's a great time. I'm always out of town for it, but I send my money. So Jackie, would you like to bring us home? Anything else you want to add to this?
No, I just want to thank our guest tonight, Linda. I'm sorry she had to leave. Craig and Robert, you guys are doing amazing work. And as Ann said, we don't know all about it, but whatever we know about, we try and take and use it to educate more people in the community about what they can do. That, we're never hopeless. We just need to have the right direction to go in to take action. And if I call you about talking to Representative Moylan about no transit police, don't be surprised, because I think it's the worst thing in the world. There, Greg, using research, right? There's been research in other parts of the country that set the way to increase safety on transit is frequency of service. So if the bus or the train is coming every 10 minutes, the likelihood of violence or people being endangered is lowered considerably. And then I still haven't figured out how we put a police on every bus and every train. But, if somebody's smarter than me, maybe they know how to do it, but I don't. So thank you all very much. I appreciate your coming, and as Ann says, stay tuned. We try to address, the major issues that are in our agenda that's going on every day so that we all can make this a better place. So thank you all. Have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you all next month. Let's
Thanks,
strike,
everyone.
make those donations.